Of all the various seasons of Ultraman over the past 56 years, one of my absolute favorites is Ultraman 1. The overarching plot is enthralling, the fight scenes are energetic, and the two main characters are some of, if not the most compelling in the entire franchise. So, considering how much I love Orb, then it's no surprise that the prequel spin-off Ultraman Orb: The Origin Saga disappointed me to no end. On paper it sounds great. Get another 12 episodes dedicated entirely to my favorite Ultraman characters. Sign me the hell up. So what happened? I think the greatest Ultraman seasons, and just stories in general, are the more character-driven ones. Especially Rube, he deserves way more love. Now, some might argue that the overall plot is more crucial, and don't get me wrong, while it is very important, no matter how riveting a plot is, if you don't care about the characters, the entire thing falls apart. For example, Ultraman Trigger has an incredibly elaborate story, but it really suffers from the fact that almost all the characters are critically lacking. I don't even hate Trigger that much, but even I'll admit these guys are boring as hell. Except Dargon. Dargon's cool. But on the flip side, Ultraman Z has little to no plot for 70% of the season, but it doesn't really matter since it's carried by its well-defined, charismatic characters. And it doesn't seem like I'm alone in thinking that. Anyway, as I said, Orb has both good characters and good story, thanks in no small part to the main protagonist and antagonist, Guy Kurenai and Juggler's Juggler. And yeah, sure, I like the quirky dumbasses too, but they can't even hold a candle to Guy and Juggler. These boys and their relationship are the backbone of the season, and frankly I think this clip defines that relationship very well. Arigato. I think Guy is just such an amazing character. Dare I say leaps and bounds ahead of most protagonists in the franchise. You see, what I think makes him so much better than, say, your average Hiroyuki or Kengo is that Guy's layered. There are shades of his character that are explored. Yeah, he's very stoic on the outside, but underneath it is a very emotionally vulnerable man. Like, he's not just fighting monsters because he can, he's fighting out of guilt. He blames himself for not being able to save his friend. Lover? It's hard to say, they never really specify. Anyway, Guy's arc across the season is learning to trust and believe in himself, thus granting him his true power. So, how does the Origin Saga handle Guy as a character? Well, instead of being layered, he's been reduced to one layer. That layer being... complete dumbass. Like, I understand that Guy is inexperienced as Ultraman, but I think they go maybe just a little too far with it. Like, it's implied he knows how to fight, or at least that's how I read it. But then he'll go out of his way to not dodge monster attacks and continuously spam his beam long after it's shown to be completely ineffective. But that's not the biggest issue with him. I think Guy's cluelessness might have been kinda interesting if they actually went on a cohesive character journey. They have the building blocks for it. He starts off incompetent, arguably more than he should be, and is a confident warrior by the end of it. But they never take it any further than that. Guy's growth into an Ultra Warrior is reduced to him being dumb, getting a few pep talks from other older Ultramen, and then being slightly less dumb afterward in an entirely unrelated way to anything his superiors told him. Dyna's over here just like, hey rookie, it all gets better from here, and then Orb does like a laser guillotine kick or something. He doesn't even defeat the final boss. Literally everyone else but him does, because he's too busy saving the villain because he's still an idiot. But we'll get back to that guy. And I understand that Guy has to grow into the character we know, but there isn't really any bridge between how he ends this spin-off and how he starts his season. He doesn't feel like a character at all here, let alone the same one from the original series. Guy's just a stoic, ignorant novice, and they completely ignore what made him so compelling to begin with. How many times do I have to stress that he's very emotional? And it's not like this arc couldn't work. Again, take Ultraman Z for example. The season starts with Z being told off by Zero. And through fighting and learning and bonding with Haruki, He's able to defeat the final boss on his own. And that season's more about the humans. Z barely even speaks every episode, and it still works better than here. Even if it isn't as compelling as Gaia's arc in the original season, it still would have been something. But the core problem is that Gaia's origin as Orb isn't even the main focus, despite what the title would lead you to believe. He's relegated to being a subplot in his own show. And instead of delivering on what the title promises, they spend most of the time on a weirdly convoluted, entirely unrelated plotline about a giant magic space tree. Now, Juggler is also a compelling character, and a definite step above most Ultraman antagonists. He's a lot like Guy. Sometimes he's goofy and over the top, sometimes he's stoic and menacing, but he's still very emotional underneath that. He isn't just trying to take over the universe or destroy humanity like oh so many villains. He's just trying to prove that he's more worthy of being Ultraman than Guy is. And to be fair, I think Juggler is handled slightly better than Guy is in the Origin Saga. However, I still don't think he's written super well on it. I like that they show just how jealous and betrayed he feels and how he tries to deal with those feelings against his best friend by bottling it all up. But the way they go about showing it could have been executed just a little better. Like here, Juggler has a sort of arc where his rage and bitterness against Guy bubbles up and culminates in him getting his Majin form, which they don't explain. But instead of focusing on his relationship with Guy to further that plotline, they introduce a random love interest for him just to kill her off, and that gives him the motivation to snap. And after that, he's kinda useless. Juggler's turn is about halfway through the story, and then he's just kinda hanging around for the last few episodes and pops in and out just to pull a random ex machina out of his ass just because they couldn't figure out how to write themselves out of a given situation. Oh, what's that guy stuck in a tube on a spaceship that's about to explode? I'll just throw Juggler in there. I don't know, he'll save him. That's in character for him, right? And that's not even mentioning that there's an even bigger gap between Juggler's persona in this and the original series than Guy. You see, another thing that bothers me is how Guy and Juggler's relationship is represented as a whole. By the end of this series, they are on far too good of terms with each other, given how they interact in the original show. They seem like they absolutely hate each other at the start of Orb, and the Origin Saga doesn't adequately set that up. In fact, there's a lot of things that the Origin Saga doesn't adequately set up. Like, I understand that there is supplementary material to fill in a lot of gaps, but the Origin Saga goes out of its way to needlessly complicate everything. Why make a boring prequel if you not only aren't going to use it to tie up loose ends, but raise more? What's the deal with Juggler's Majin form? How did Guy get the Orb Ring? How did Juggler get the Dark Ring? What was the point of making an Orb prequel, calling it the Origin Saga, and making it about everything except Orb's origin? However, I could have forgiven all of that if the characters that were the main focus of the show were actually compelling. And none of them are offensive, they just aren't interesting enough to carry the story. Amate is mildly interesting in that she wants to find a peaceful solution to the central conflict, and I like that Shinra and Raigo both act as opposing sides of her conscience, so that's all any of them really do. Amate sticks around to drag out her plotline and basically just repeat it, and the other two are just there to fight the bug aliens. But what annoys me even more is that they got Yasuyuki Maekawa to play Shinra, and he's given nothing to do. He is a god among men, and he makes for a wildly entertaining villain.
Yo!
And yet here he's ultimately reduced to a talking prop. If anything, he should have played Psyche, but we'll get back to him in a second. Anyway, Mikat and Rika are really nothing. Mikat is there to give Juggler motivation he already had, and Rika is there to fill space pretty much. Similarly, Shohei and Yui are given no traits and a disproportionate amount of screen time given how uninteresting they are. And the relationship between Amate and Shohei is more awkward than anything else. They don't have much chemistry and their scenes together are just kind of a slog if I'm being honest. But Dr. Psyche is a monumental downgrade from Juggler as both a villain and a character in general. Hell, Celebro is a more compelling antagonist. Psyche's entire motivation is just the cliche of, war is bad, I'll take away everyone's free will so that no one will ever fight again, haha. In one of his first scenes, he's like, I hate conflict, I'm not a barbarian, and proceeds to force two monsters to fight each other to the death so he can become more powerful. His backstory is so vague and bland, I can only assume they were actively trying to make the least compelling antagonist ever. Oh yeah, and for some reason they decided to save him and give him a happy ending with a main cast, despite not giving him an actual redemption arc. Everyone's just like, yeah, he definitely got hundreds upon hundreds of innocent people killed, including our own friends. But like, his cutesy robot sidekick exploded, so we gotta cut him some slack, you know? He faces no consequences, and isn't even called out for his hypocrisy. The only other characters that actually do anything are the Legacy Ultramen, and they're not implemented well either. What a shock. Like, it makes a little bit of sense for Cosmos and Agil to be there, as they have somewhat interesting perspectives on Amate's and Psyche's situations. Because Cosmos and Amate are both pacifists, Agil used to have a similar view of humanity as Psyche does now, but that's their entire purpose in the series. They're important for 2 scenes, and they're just kinda kicked around for the rest of their screen time. Dinah and Guy are only here because they're each the other half of Cosmos and Agil's duos. Even though Dinah and Cosmos both have other partners and are only a pair here because of Saga, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense there either. Dinah adds so little here, you probably could have just plugged Justice in. It's not like they don't have a suit for them. Anyway, not all these Ultramen are treated equally. Dinah adds less than nothing to the story and is just randomly a badass. Cosmos feels kinda one note, that note being pacifist. They kind of ignore the fact that he'll still kill if he knows there's no other way out. It's almost like they haven't watched his show but decided to write for him anyway. Can't really blame them, to be honest. But Guy and Agil are completely done dirty here. They are fighting space bugs and they lose. How? Do you people not remember when these two fought a god and won? Like, I know this franchise is notorious for having bad power scaling, but what is this? I don't know, this might just be a personal thing, since Guy and Agil are right up there with Orb as being my favorite Ultraman, but it just really grinds my gears. And don't get me wrong, I'm happy that all these guys get to appear again rather than Zero cameoing for the 20,000th time in a row, but I just wish they were used properly. Now, despite that, I don't think the Origin Saga is completely awful. Like, a lot of character stuff really annoys me, but there's still some decent stuff to be found. I don't hate the soundtrack, it's not super exceptional, but I appreciate that they at least bothered to reorchestrate character themes from previous seasons. The use of Guy's theme seems kinda odd to me, though. They have him whip out his harmonica in the first or second episode, and the only other time that music really plays is really randomly in the middle of the show. What's the point of it here? It's not any more focused on Guy than any other scene. It's non-diegetic too, he's not even playing it. It's just kind of in the background. This song that is so important to Guy's character that it plays in almost every single episode of the original show is just kind of thrown around once or twice. Again, just kind of weird. Anyway, I don't hate the concept of the Tree of Life, and I'm not even against this plot being used to tell Orb's origin. I just think it could have been executed a little better, specifically if it was more focused on literally anything. Now, the costume design and general aesthetic are kind of a mixed bag in my opinion. The outfits of everyone on Planet Cannon are kind of odd. Not necessarily bad, but I'm just not into it. Most of them are dressed like an anime cosplayer's interpretation of a 1700s farmer, and I don't think it meshes too well with the knockoff Star Wars ships. And the Empress's guards are dressed like cutesy samurai waitresses? I mean, it seems kind of impractical to me, but I guess I'll give it points for creativity. Psyche's outfit, however, I take a lot of issue with. What's with the weird Jar Jar Binks ears popping out of his hood? What is going on here? What are you doing? And the weird alligator skin dress doesn't work for me either. The Ultramen are pretty much wearing the same outfits they always wear. Musashi and Asuka are dressed exactly the same as they were in Saga. Gamu and Fujimi are wearing pretty normal in-character outfits too. However, they don't have mults anymore, so automatic 0 out of 10. Anyway, Guy and Juggler also have the same outfits they wore in the flashback in episode 23 of the original Orb, which I'll get back to in just a sec. And they're fine, I guess. Guy looks like a Jedi peasant, and Juggler looks like a really boring Cenobite, but I guess it's not a super big deal if they aren't the main characters. I like all the monster suits to an extent. The Bezelbs, or Bezelvs, or Bezerbs, I don't know. As well as the Queen and the War Deity are decent, but I surprisingly actually love the Psy Queen suit. I especially like the humanoid elements to it. You don't often see that. My issue is just that the Queen is a really boring final boss, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, the Ultra suits are utilized kind of strangely here. I just find it odd that the Ultramen don't do any kind of type change. Except 2 times where Dino uses strong type for no real reason. Again, it's not like they don't have the suits, I guess they just didn't feel like riding around those forms. Gaia Supreme and Cosmos Eclipse mode probably would have solved all these problems a lot faster. And personally, I'm just not a fan of Orb Origin the first. It's just the Orb Origin suit with the black and red inverted. It feels lazy and just generally doesn't look as good as Orb Origin. One thing that I liked about the Origin Saga is that it's way less of a toy commercial than Orb is, but this kind of flies in the face of all that. What is this suit's purpose beyond merchandising? You could have just used Orb Origin. Did you not feel like choreographing sword fights? That can't be it since you have a surplus of them, so what's the issue? But apart from that, the fight scenes, both big and small, are all entertaining to some degree. No matter how much I enjoy good characters, this franchise is built on big monster fights, and at the very least it succeeds in that regard. It's not super exceptional or anything, but I guess it clears the very low bar of being better than Ultraman powered. Anyway, it's filmed more in the style of an early Heisei season rather than the new gen stuff, and I do appreciate that they did something different. However, it's just that in my opinion, the new gen stuff is a little more visually engaging than early Heisei. I'm fine with both, but it's just my personal preference. So, what was even the point of this? Not this video, there was no point of that, but did the Origin Saga justify its existence? Short answer, no. It's meant to tell the origin of Orb, despite the fact we already saw all the important bits in episode 23 of Orb. This just shows a slightly longer version of that flashback, and from then on it's just a bunch of random stuff with Orb in the background. And it's not even like it left a mark on the franchise. They make 2 minor references to it in Ultraman Z.
Juggler, こんなのは光の戦士の戦い方じゃねえ。
戦士の戦い方ってやつを見せてくれよな。
The War Deity and Planet 050 show up once or twice, and that's about it. It's almost entirely superfluous. And it looks even worse when you compare it to the monumental impact Orb had on Ultraman going forth. But, despite my complaining, I don't hate it. It's not the worst thing with the Ultraman name on it, but it's far from being the best. It had potential to be amazing, but it just fell short. And I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. But I think we can all agree that it's definitely better than Ultra 7X.